Well, thanks for staying with As It Happens. My guests tonight, Sanef Chairperson Mahlase and AmaBhungane investigative journalist Karabo Rajuili. And of course, we're discussing a report by Right2Know campaign on surveillance of journalists in South Africa. Karabo, one of the things that you've highlighted as AmaBhungane, and this is the case that you're taking to court, which we touched on briefly, has been a failure, as you put it, by the laws in South Africa. Let's first talk about the RICA law. What is wrong with it in its current state?
Yeah. So at AmaBhungane, we are saying that the RICA, which is our surveillance law, many South Africans will know RICA as what you do when you register your SIM card. But essentially, it's the law which allows the state the legal means to spy on its citizens. Now, just a correction, sorry, I'm not an investigative reporter, but I'm the advocacy coordinator. So AmaBhungane is launching this challenge as part of its advocacy work. So we are saying that RICA right now doesn't comply with constitutional standards in a democracy. And there's a number of reasons for it, but the overarching reason is that it fails to protect journalists and lawyers who've got an obligation to ensure that their sources remain confidential in the practice of their work, but then also it doesn't provide enough safeguards for any other person residing in South Africa's borders. And there's a number of reasons for this. The first is that the process by which a member of the intelligence agencies may get a warrant to monitor the communications of a journalist or any other member of the public is completely secretive. So what happens in this instance is that a member of the intelligence agencies or crime intelligence goes to what is known as the designated RICA judge to get an order saying this person is involved in some kind of corruption or some kind of activity which may harm the state, and therefore we need to be able to monitor their communications, to be able to find out and then ultimately prosecute. What we see in this process, and that is also revealed in the book, the report by Right2Know, is that often this process is highly compromised. In fact, one of the case studies talks about, and I think it's in the Sunday Times, how in that instance the crime intelligence officer who had sought to get a warrant from the RICA judge had actually lied on the application. So said that these journalists were involved in a smuggling ring and had lied on the actual form about who they were specifically, denying the RICA judge the ability to know who these individuals were and rightfully either grant or deny the warrant. In AmaBhungane's circumstance, Sam was identified as a target of interception, but very interestingly, when we did the process of submitting a promotion of access to information request for the interception warrant granted by the RICA judge, it confirmed that the interception had happened over a course of 6 months, which meant that Sam Saul's not only communication with sources, but his personal calls to family, friends, loved ones had been under surveillance. But the larger principle that we're concerned with is that the Office of the Inspector General currently didn't find anything wrong with the monitoring of a journalist's cell phone communications, which violates the ability of journalists to protect sources. So we're saying in this very process, it needs to be more robust. There needs to be something there needs to be a public advocate who can be a third individual to ensure that the public's position on any kind of warrant is put forward in this very secretive process. Another concern we've got is that there's simply no notification. Yeah.
What about the issue of private companies and how they are storing a lot of information about individuals, but there doesn't seem to be much protection of that information?
No, you're spot on there, but just another aspect which covers both private companies and the intelligence agencies is the lack of any notification even after the communication surveillance has taken place. So what the AmaBhungane application says, and this is based on practice in other countries, is that after an interception warrant has been granted and has taken place, there should be an opportunity later on for the journalists and members of the public to get notifications so that they may challenge it after the fact. Because of this, and one of the aspects that we also deal with the application, which deals quite substantively for all members of the public, including journalists, is that outside of the law, so there's this process of getting a RICA warrant, but there's also something called the National Communication Centers, and they've got the ability to do mass surveillance. So in other words, they don't need a warrant to collect what is called the metadata, so the location, so not the actual content of the communications, but the location, who you spoke to, what time you spoke to. This happens outside the law, and it also happens on a mass basis. So thousands and thousands of communications of South Africans, of journalists, is being collected by the NCC, and there's no legal recourse to challenge this. So that forms part of AmaBhungane's application as well, to say you cannot have bulk surveillance because it infringes of the rights of thousands and thousands of South Africans and journalists, and this must fall under some kind of legal mechanism.
And Karabo, you really bring us back to a point that Mahlatse raised earlier, that this is not unique to the journalistic profession, that it is an issue that all South Africans should be concerned about. And it's one of the things that Right2Know is hoping to do, and this is just to raise broader awareness among the public. But why should ordinary South Africans care about the fact that government is listening in on their conversations?
I think we should care because we've had political activists whose phones have been tapped, people that lead communities, aggrieved communities whose phones have been tapped. And this is part of intimidation and it's part of silencing them. But also there has to be a respect of privacy for individuals that is also quite critical. And the fact that there are people that are abusing the system, because when RICA was first introduced, how it was sold to the South African public is that this is a crime-busting effort. We need to know, to have the data so that we can find people, and it should be used to investigate legitimate criminal activities or suspected criminal activities. But we have seen the abuse, and it's evidently there. And then when you have political opponents, you know, strangely enough, even within the ANC, complaining about being investigated by an ANC government, it shows that there is abuse. And it's time that we review this and we start talking about it, because we can't have a situation where journalists are silenced and whistleblowers are silenced because the state is silencing them. That has to be the main motivation. But I think a lot of the times when you talk about media freedom, there is this assumptions to say that, you know, it's a journalistic issue, but it is a matter of public interest, because the work that journalists are doing is to the benefit of community. It is about holding the state accountable, and when the state uses apparatus to stop that, then all of us should actually worry.
Will Sanef be joining this court action?
Yes, we are joining. We have actually joined the court action. We have been in talks with AmaBhungane, and we are very supportive of it. I know also Right2Know will also be there as friends of the court because of the importance of this case.
Karabo, speak to us about the actual court case. Where are we with that process?
We are quite far along the process. The application was officially launched in April last year, 2016, and we cited 12 different respondents, including all of the intelligence agencies, the intelligence oversight agencies, and as well as the Minister of State Security. We have received replying papers from most of the respondents. There's a few respondents who will abide by the decision of the court, and we are currently preparing a reply to those papers and should be launching in the next few months. So this is something that the public should be interested in. Journalists should definitely be following with a keen interest, because this is going to be one of the mechanisms by which we can begin to reform our intelligence agencies and ensure that journalists are able to do their job.
Who else, Mahlatse, can journalists and can be lobbied within civil society in order to ensure that groups like yourself as Sanef, AmaBhungane, are not lone voices in society, almost speaking up, but seemingly representing a small group of people?
Obviously, something like this needs all of us to be speaking up. We need a strong voice against it. And interesting enough, we've also had politicians interested, because that can also be used against them. So when people realize that it's not just about the journalists, but it's about strengthening our democracy, hopefully the voices will be much stronger. And part of, I think, this report, or releasing this report, and you saw it's very conversational, very easy to follow, is so that South Africans are very much aware and educated about what we are actually talking about. The one aspect of this that we haven't talked about, which the report does talk to, is the SABC journalists and the fact that they have to be subjected to security vetting. And that's part of the things that the Right2Know mentions in that report, that they have a constitutional mandate to be able to do their work without fear or favor. And currently, under the infrastructure bill, they would be forced to do security vetting, which is basically handing over their information about, who they live with, who are their partners, etc., etc., etc. And we have submitted, all of us with AmaBhungane and Right2Know, to Parliament to say that there should be a cover-out to journalists, that they should not be subjected to this simply because they work for a national key point, while recognizing that, as a national key point, the SABC must have the security, but we must allow for journalists to be able to speak. And I was quite interested in that report because one of the things it talked about was how brazen the SABC management then was about talking to journalists and saying, remember, you work for a national key point and therefore we will be monitoring your conversations. And that is intimidation for people that do such an important role, or should be doing an important role in South Africa. So in efforts of protecting the public broadcaster, our public broadcaster, if ever there's also a reason for people to join in, there's one.
All right. Karabo, just final thoughts from you. In terms of the change in government and the changes that are to be enacted within the security sector of the state, are there any different ways of negotiation that you're going to be exploring?
As AmaBhungane and I think Right2Know and others, the premise of the reform agenda is about saying that we need an intelligence agency which is accountable and transparent. And so one avenue is definitely through our RICA challenge, but it's also going to be through saying to our intelligence agencies, journalists have got a right to know what the Parliamentary Oversight Committee in looking at intelligence structures in Parliament does, and to get reports of this. Journalists have got a right to be able to publish statistics from our telecom service providers about how many members of the public have their call records handed over to the intelligence agencies. So in the practice of our work of writing and doing journalism, we hope to create a more open and transparent intelligence structure. So we're looking at a number of avenues, but I think at this moment in time, definitely the law reform process is crucial.
All right. Karabo, thanks for joining us. And of course, she's with the Advocacy Department at AmaBhungane and the Chairperson of the South African National Editors Forum, Mahlase, joining us for this important conversation on As It Happens. That's where we end off the show tonight. I'm Cathy Mohlahlana.